Hey, it's time for TV Skywriter. Welcome, everybody. I'm Pat Murray, and this is TV Skywriter. This is where I introduce you to really cool people that I think you should know. Now, half the time my guests are local, and half the time my guests are from somewhere else. This time, yes, my guests are here in Durham, North Carolina. They're affiliated with Duke University, and my guests are Thomas Williams and Shelytia Cocroft. We're going to be talking about Alzheimer's disease research and treatment. So welcome to the show, Mr. Williams, Ms. Cocroft.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Henry Edmonds, I have to throw a huge shout out to him.
Absolutely.
He's with the Bryan Alzheimer's Center at Duke University. He told me about you and exciting research that you're undertaking. So I just want to hand it over to you. You can tell us who you are and what you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Shelytia, would you like to start?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Well, again, good evening, everyone. My name is Shelytia Cocroft, and I'm a medical sociologist trained at Wayne State University in Detroit. My area of specialization is Alzheimer's disease in the African American community. And what I'm interested in learning is what type of knowledge older African Americans need in order to make decisions about participation in Alzheimer's disease clinical research. And I'm currently partnering with a group of scientists to also explore the consequences of disclosing amyloid results to cognitively healthy older adults.
Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Thomas Williams, like you said. I am actually just recently faculty at Duke University. I'm housed in the Initiative for Science and Society, and my work focuses on both law, I'm a trained lawyer, and bioethics. Over the past year, I've started working with the Bryan Research Center and partnering with Henry and now Shelytia to engage in the same kind of research study, but also to really begin to think critically about why African Americans aren't involved in clinical research, how we can bring them in, but also how we can create partnerships that feel a little bit more even when we engage in clinical research.
Awesome. Now, we will deal with the fact that you're throwing around huge words like amyloids later.
Okay.
But let's make this really, really basic. Let's get all the way down to the basics.
Yes.
I actually moved here to Durham to take care of my aunt, Mamie Perry. She was a retired teacher, and she didn't have any kids. So I moved in with her years ago, took care of her till she died, and decided to stay here. While my sister stayed behind in Chicago and took care of our dad who had Alzheimer's.
Oh, okay.
So Alzheimer's is real deep for me. A lot of people ask me, is dementia the same as Alzheimer's? And does dementia always lead to Alzheimer's?
That's a great question.
Excellent question. And so what we know to answer the first part of your question, when you hear the term dementia, it's an umbrella term that encompasses several types or several different forms of dementia, Alzheimer's being one form of dementia that unfortunately impacts African Americans at greater rates compared to other groups, whites in particular. And to answer your second question, not all cases of dementia result in Alzheimer's disease. And so that's why it's very important to make sure that if you're suspecting changes in memory that seem to be exceeding normal aging, that you immediately go in and speak to your doctor and make sure that you're documenting those observations so that the doctor can try to figure out what's really happening.
Okay, so I'm going to aim this one at you, Thomas. So as we get older, we do get forgetful. So what type of memory loss, in fact, how far does it go before someone should really be concerned? I mean, we all lose our keys and it's like, darn it, where are my glasses? But at what point do we actually start worrying about the person?
I think that's a phenomenal question, right? Because we all lose our keys. I lose my keys. But as we get older, I think we get more concerned about what that indicates. And so what we're looking for when we talk about Alzheimer's related dementia and things that should signal to you, hey, I need to go to the doctor's office, are changes that start to disrupt daily life. You can't retrace your steps and figure out where you might have put your keys. That's different from not being able to place your keys, right? So we're looking for things that are really changing one's ability to independently function. And there's lots of other great information. I don't want to go through the long laundry list of signs that we look for. But if you go to our website, the Bryan Research Center or the Alzheimer's Association website, they can give you a list of some early warning signs. But I would say the takeaway is these kind of disruption to your daily life. That's what you're looking for. So if dad can no longer get help himself up and dressed and out the door and do the things that he normally can, that's when we want to start wondering if maybe we need to go in and see a physician.
Okay. And to mention Mr. Henry Edmonds' name again, I know he's in charge of African American outreach. So
Yes.
So it leads me to ask you, you just said that for some reason, Black folks are more prone to getting Alzheimer's. I'm wondering why that is. I heard that as long as your mind is active, you should be okay. I don't think that's necessarily true because my aunt was very active and she got Alzheimer's. So.
Well, and I think that that's another excellent question. And currently, the science can't really give a succinct and clear answer on that. And so what we think we know is that because African Americans are predisposed to comorbidities such as diabetes and hypertension, and those preventable diseases have been linked to Alzheimer's disease, those might be some good indications, but there's no definitive answer to that question.
And I would just jump in to say a comorbidity, for those of us who aren't necessarily that familiar with that kind of terminology, it appears with Alzheimer's.
Exactly,
so
yes.
Often when people have high blood pressure or hypertension or type 2 diabetes, it will appear alongside Alzheimer's.
Those symptoms for Alzheimer's.
Exactly.
Yes.
I'm really suspicious. Okay. Both my dad and my aunt were slim and relatively active. I mean, you know, for their age.
Sure.
They were both working people, so they weren't idle. Not that people who don't work aren't idle, but you know what I mean. They were active in their activities. My aunt was active in her church. Like I said, they both were in good health, relatively speaking. And so I don't know. I mean, a healthy person can get Alzheimer's. I mean, they didn't have high blood pressure. So after hearing what you just said, I would think if you are able to improve your health or remain healthy, there's a less likelihood of your getting Alzheimer's. But after looking at my dad and my aunt, I don't know what to say.
Sure. So I can speak a little bit, and I think Shelytia can also say some things about that. You know, having a direct relative who suffers from Alzheimer's is the greatest risk factor, right? So when we talk about that term comorbidities,
with age
right.
is like the greatest.
Age is the greatest factor, then family,
right?
Family history, and then a gene,
right?
Which we can talk about a little bit more later. But to your point, we can't control for all these things, and so right now the reason that we're doing clinical research and clinical studies is to try to figure out what that link is. So how strong is it? Like, is being slim that much more important than being African American, perhaps? Where does it fit in with the other risk factors? That's all stuff we're playing with and trying to figure out. So we can draw some kind of broad assertions around what we think we're seeing. But the reason that we need folks to engage in clinical research, the reason that I want to look at clinical research is because we need to figure out a way to have more people engage to try to figure out the scientific answers to these questions.
Right, and the impact on those groups that seem to be at greater risk compared to other groups.
Okay, well, let's talk about clinical research.
Sure.
What does that entail? Just the very notion of it frightens a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So set us at ease.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, again, clinical research is really important. It helps us figure out so much. Any drug that you're taking is something that went through the clinical research process. That's why it's approved and that's why you can use it. So that goes from your antibiotic to your pain reliever. I teach FDA law also over at the law school, so I think about this a lot. And we've put protections into place. Most African Americans know about Tuskegee. Most Americans probably know about Tuskegee at this point. But there is a really long history outside of Tuskegee around clinical research that didn't treat participants fairly, whether it was prisoners or African Americans or other groups. And so we put into place a regulatory system that puts really specific guidelines around clinical research. And it makes sure that you're protected, that you have to know what's going on, and that you can raise questions or leave that research at any time.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we hope to accomplish with the work that Thomas is working on in terms of really engaging the African American community around what partnerships look like, what information the community has about this thing that we're talking about in terms of informed consent. What is that? What does it include? And what space the community occupies in this research conversation? Because unfortunately, I think that one of the barriers is what you've already pointed out earlier in terms of language. So if I'm using terminology that people don't understand, then of course that's going to create some type of resistance. And so again, what we're hoping to do through conversations like this and other conversations that we intend to have throughout, the Durham area, is to really just, make it as clear as possible, and then allow people to come back with their own questions about this research process and what happens when you engage with an academic institution, and what are your rights, and what happens with the information once it's been collected, so that everybody is on the same page, so that then at that point of making the decision, they have all the facts.
And I think we hope that research, I think we hope that research too will serve a purpose for researchers.
Yes.
To force them to step back from the assumptions they make about what it means to engage with folks, and what value they bring from it. So I'm hoping that we can act as some kind of a voice for people who would maybe get involved in clinical research, but their concerns aren't being heard now. That leads to better answers to all kinds of questions that up to now African Americans and other groups who are on the margins have not been involved in or considered around.
Okay, now I'm actually taking part in clinical research over at Duke. Because of family history. Like I said, my dad had Alzheimer's, my aunt had Alzheimer's, that's my mom's sister. My great-grandfather had what they called old timers, which I think is an old word for Alzheimer's. Have you heard Black people say that?
Yes.
He's got old timers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm taking part in research. They were saying that it's good to do this because, again, my family history. And if I could give just a little sneak preview, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
I was given all kinds of paperwork telling me of my rights, telling me what exactly is going on with this research, also telling me if I feel uncomfortable about it, I can withdraw at any time.
Yep. Component.
It's not like some student can come along and say, oh, let me look up some information. No, my information is confidential. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of things that they were testing me for was my ability to remember things. So I was connecting dots. I was
Did you have to,
I was going to say.
Did you draw the clock and have to set it for 3?
Not that one. I think I did. Well, actually, I'm in phase 2. I think that happened during phase 1.
Okay.
So they give you all these tests, and then they have you come back like 3 years later.
Okay.
Yes, you're doing a longitudinal study, right?
Right. So I'm in phase 2. So hopefully my memory hasn't, lessened much over the 3 years. But basically, they give you words like flashcard words, and they try to see if you remember them. Mm-hmm. And then they ask you the words, like later on during the study.
Sure.
If you can remember the 10 words, whatever. So it's actually kind of fun, and it's very easygoing. Mm-hmm. Now, the first time it's a little, I have to tell, I hope I'm not spilling too many beans here, but the first time they do take a blood sample.
Okay.
So if you're afraid of needles, just look away. Mm-hmm. Just look away. It'll be over soon.
And I was just going to say, in working with Henry, we've talked a lot about the concept of having blood taken. And what that represents for older African Americans. And that for perhaps my grandparents' generation or the generation just above my parents, having blood taken isn't something minor, especially connected to clinical research.
Right.
So it's about also engaging folks in that conversation that generationally never occurred to me till I got to sit down with folks to wrap my head around things that I consider minor, but that really inform their decision making, and that you've got to tease out and figure out. And so that's part of the work that we're hoping to do is to figure out what these barriers that seem minor, right? Like it hurts to get blood taken, but for other people, it's not about the prick. It's about the collection of that blood and what that means.
And what's going to happen to that blood, and who's
Exactly.
going to have access to the information that is gleaned from that blood. So, I mean, it's from the scientific community's perspective, it's a minor ask, but from some participants, it is a major commitment because, you know, my grandparents also had Alzheimer's disease, and I can remember a conversation where my grandfather would say, it's in the blood. You know, so I don't want people to know what's in my blood, meaning from my interpretation, it's like that's my whole life is told through my blood. And I don't know that I want some stranger having access to my story.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I was unaware. I'm 61. I was only concerned about the needle.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But maybe people who are even older than I am, maybe there's a deeper, like you said, a deeper thing about blood testing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really interesting. You know, I am from what I would call a pretty well-educated African-American family. And both of my aunt holds a PhD and my mom holds a PhD in social work. We lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's after a really long progressive illness. Mm-hmm. We lost my uncle just last fall to Alzheimer's after a long progressive illness. And neither my mom nor my aunt, when I told them that I was working on this study, had any idea that Alzheimer's rates in the African-American community were higher than they were in Caucasian communities. So somehow we're missing all this information that is critical, right? And we're missing these pieces and not having these conversations about blood. And taken together, it's not serving us. It's not serving our interests. It's not making sure that we're engaged in clinical studies to try to figure out what might help make a difference, to make sure that there's not some differential between when it's given to a majority member and us, whether that's for psychosocial reasons or otherwise. And so there's really an impending need as we continue to gray, as we continue to get older, for even folks my age, I'm nearing 40, to begin to think about engaging in this research so that we can think about the long arc of the progression. Because once you've figured out Alzheimer's is there, it's been happening for maybe decades.
Yep.
The slow deterioration and the building of plaques and tangles.
Sure.
So
Alzheimer's is a relatively new term. I mean, people have been calling it old-timers and senility for years.
Right. And some of it is curable, right? So that's the other reason to get to the doctor, because if it's vascular dementia.
Right. Then, yeah, it's curable. Or even in younger people where the science tells us that, okay, we've got these things like high blood pressure and obesity that we know, or that we think we know, are linked to the development of Alzheimer's, right? If we start changing our lifestyle and changing how we eat and really being focused on the impact of stress in our lives, then we might be able to, even without interjecting clinical interventions, i.e. medications, to begin to bring some of those rates down. But I think we have to start the conversation early rather than later.
I'm glad you're doing this, really glad, because in the early days of my taking care of my aunt back in like 2002 or whatever, I was looking for books. I was looking for help. I was looking for information. And all of the books, in fact, I plan to write a book for low-income caregivers, because I'm telling you, all the books were for highly educated people with seemingly unlimited resources.
Yeah. And
I mean, people were talking about taking their loved one on vacation to Portugal. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. Well, yeah. Well,
exactly.
Some Portuguese music
Order
and have some
in.
food.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
You know, that would bring back some long ago memories. And I'm like, okay. I took my dad over to a neighbor's house who had a beautiful garden. We took a tour. Things like that are actually great social treatment, I think, for Alzheimer's patients, because I could take my dad to their garden every week. And of course, he didn't remember. He had Alzheimer's.
Right.
So that's something that was really wonderful. You really don't have to go crazy and take people to South Africa and France and, you know, all these different places. I mean, there's simple ways of at least dealing socially with your
I
loved
think
one
also
who has Alzheimer's?
those trips to the park were really important for you. I think one of the things when we talk about Alzheimer's that we don't think about is, and that our community really needs to think about, African Americans especially, is long-term plans.
Yeah.
Is how you take care of you as a caregiver. Why you try to do this, right? Because you know, getting outside, having community, having structure and support is so critical. And you know, in terms of what we know about preventing Alzheimer's, having social structure and supports is really good for you to make sure that you're not going to show signs, right? So I want to make sure that as we think about Alzheimer's, as we think about impacts, it's also about like my kids who will have to provide care for me, or my nieces and nephews. And how do we protect and take care of these folks at the same time that we think about how we prevent the disease generally?
Wow, I think this is a good start. So for those of us who are in Durham, African American, maybe we're caregivers, maybe we're not. We're thinking about the future. How can we get started? Do you have to have a family history of Alzheimer's to take part in this clinical research that you're embarking on?
Sure. Well, we have a lot of different studies
going on. Yeah.
Different studies have different parameters about the folks that they want to engage. In some of our studies, we look for folks who do have a mother or a direct lineage that has had Alzheimer's, but in others we don't, and we're trying to figure out what those groups are. So you can look at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center's website, and through them you can get in touch with myself. I'm happy to give my email. I'm at tw162@duke.edu.
Or we can just contact Henry. Henry has all the information about all the studies that are going on. And then additional resources. And so Henry just made us aware of this wonderful manual that's produced by the Alzheimer's Association for clergy, right? And it is a really wonderful guide that encourages and gives guidance on how clergy members and leadership can have the conversation around Alzheimer's disease, but more broadly, this thing that we're hearing now about brain health. What is your cognitive health? What is brain health? So that we want to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach, right? Because as we're trying to preserve our well-being, brain health is a part of that process.
And it begins young, I would also say. Like, it's not something to think about only when you're in your 30s. You know, having mild traumatic brain injuries can increase your chance of Alzheimer's, which means playing football. You need to think about these things long term. And so I would also just say that we're happy to come and reach out to community members and have sessions and talk this through with church leaders, with congregations.
Right, or people who just want to know.
Absolutely. Community
want more
groups.
information, right?
That's wonderful. What I would love for you to do is to send me info. I think you already sent me the info that you want for the end of show credits.
Sure.
But let's do an article. Let's, you know, in the Durham Skywriter, let's do a video or whatever. Let's talk more about this. This is really important for our community.
Great. We're happy to. We're excited about it.
Right. And what I'd also like to share with you is a little bit about my dissertation research, because in the scientific community, there's so little information that targets African Americans. And so one of the innovations of my dissertation research was to look at what older African Americans know about their brain health, what attitudes they have around brain health, and then the kind of day-to-day practices or behaviors that they're participating in that will promote that. And I think for me, that was a very important learning experience, because it was connected to what you've already talked about in terms of access to resources. So what happens if you're a person who has a limited income caring for a person with Alzheimer's disease, and you know that you've been told that you need to eat fruits and vegetables and, you know, go to the senior center, but you don't have the resources to do any of that? What recourse do you have?
Okay.
So we're excited to have those kind of conversations, to give people some practical information to walk away with, and then to connect them to resources.
Okay, so tell us of a couple of studies that you're doing right now, and whether we can take advantage of the results. That's really important.
Sure. Well, the direct research we're working on right now is still in process. We won't know for a couple of years what the results are, but it should inform how to look at cognitive testing once people have begun to see sources of Alzheimer's that might be relevant to them. But they're doing all kinds of research at the Bryan Research Center.
Mm-hmm.
It relates to diet and exercise and risk, and lots of other areas. And we're happy to connect folks with a rundown of the literature and what it can help inform in their choices currently.
Exactly. Yeah. There's as Thomas is saying, there's a lot of activity. And then for those persons who aren't yet ready to engage in clinical type of research, there's a lot of social scientific research that's also going on where information is needed, again, to inform the conversations around what type of knowledge, what type of attitudes, and what kind of behaviors among older African Americans, so that we can think about some targeted preventative strategies.
I think it's really important. I hope that the people watching this are able to take advantage of this opportunity. I hear the echo again. I hope you don't hear it.
I don't hear. Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, okay, it's just me. Okay, so again,
I was in Chicago. My grandmother fell ill, and the illness that my family told me that she had was Alzheimer's disease, but they weren't ready to have that word disease attached because she's just old, she's senile. And that whole conversation and battling through it. So I was commuting between Chicago and St. Louis to try to, manage her care. And you're right, it is not for the faint of heart.
And I wonder why people resist it so. When I moved here, my aunt's friends, they knew something was wrong, but I guess it was just too much for them to really admit that my aunt was that sick, so to speak, with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, there's a body of science, there's a body of research that talks about the stigma that's attached to it.
I mean, it's not her fault. It's nobody's fault.
Sure.
I think it's also maybe connected to having to deal with the fact that you're aging. I think for the children of these folks, it admits the possibility that maybe you might have these kinds of possibilities in your future. And maybe they haven't read the scientific literature, but life patterns much of itself like our parents do. So when we see our parents get sick, I think it's really scary to acknowledge that it might be something that could impact us.
And the powerlessness that goes with that, because as you described your aunt and then your father, that if you didn't know that they were ill, you wouldn't know it because they still physically looked fine.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, that was like one of the hardest parts of it, because my grandmother looked great. I mean, I'd never seen her look better, but she didn't remember my name.
Wow.
And I think to the point too, and it's important to point out, there's a physiology to Alzheimer's. It's not just a clinical label that we stick on things. There are changes to your brain that are indicated by Alzheimer's. And so this is real. This is changing your body. It's literally deteriorating your brain.
Right. And that's why we need to have the conversation, so that we can engage people around the fact that there's scientific evidence. And this is not just people wandering off or, getting senile, because that's what old age brings. This is something very different.
Okay. Now let's deal with this gigantic word you threw at us so cavalierly. Amyloid, you were saying when you wrote to me, Thomas, you were talking about amyloid buildup. And I'm like, is that what I read about as plaque buildup? Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
Take this.
We can do it together.
Okay.
We can do it together. Okay.
Sure.
So amyloid is a plaque, right? And so the way that I describe it is that when the blood flow to the brain becomes interrupted, right? Because disease will interrupt that, and then oxygen builds, and then it results in this plaque buildup. And so I like, and please pardon this analogy, but it's almost like if you were to wax a table, and you wax it and you wax it in the buildup. It's similar. It's a similar kind of process. And I think what's important to remember is that it happens over a long period of time.
So, and we don't know when it starts, right? So, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. My mom seems to be fine right now, cognitively normal. My aunt does as well. That's not to say that it couldn't be building in my brain right now.
Right.
Which is why we're trying to figure this stuff out, right? We're not sure when it starts. And there's a subset of folks who get Alzheimer's when they're quite young. We just heard some wonderful research from a gentleman named Richard
Dr.
Shaw, who's at Wake Forest University, whose wife succumbed to early onset Alzheimer's, which affected her and her family. Yeah. And so these plaques kind of build, and then we start to see evidence as the disease progresses of these tangles. They're called tau tangles, like Taurus the bull, and they're protein tangles. And they are called tangles because they kind of look like a glob of hair. And so that's kind of the second stage, right? This is the second stage of this kind of physiology of disease.
This isn't something that you feel, is it? Or is it something that just shows up in x-rays of your brain?
When we look at a slice of brain,
right. But it manifests in terms of behaviors. And so like you were saying that your father couldn't remember. That's one of those signs where holding on to a memory, like an immediate memory, is very difficult. But I'm sure that he was able to tell you things from 30, 40 years ago with no problem.
Oh, sure. Now, I noticed with my aunt, she would use certain phrases to help her remember, because when I would mention Fannie Kane Owen, that's one of her friends from childhood or teenhood, my aunt would always say, oh, she was smart. She skipped a grade in school. She would always say that same phrase when Miss Owen's name was mentioned. And it started to occur to me that my aunt did that so that she could remember who she was.
And it could be just the main memory that she's attached to that person, because that's a memory that she's been able to hold on to.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I think maybe that's a good tool. Maybe we should start doing that. Just using certain phrases for things that we're starting to forget. I don't know.
It's quite interesting. I heard an NPR interview of a gentleman who had written a book about his father's demise, and that one of the kind of silver lining gifts of Alzheimer's is that they're not just losing everything, they're going back to spaces that are really familiar and safe, and reliving them in a way, versus dementia where you kind of just lose all the pieces. So, I mean, there's so much more work to do to understand Alzheimer's, but the fact that while this deterioration is happening, that folks are literally in other places in their life. And
because very often people think that their spouses are their children, or my dad would pound on the door, not pound, but knock on the door at 3:30 in the morning, saying to my sister, who was in her 50s, get up, it's time to go to school. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, another thing about my dad and my aunt, and maybe this will show up in research when you start, testing different people, they start showing signs of forgetfulness, alarming forgetfulness, way before they're diagnosed. In the case of my aunt, my mom and my aunt had gone to Augusta, Georgia, their dad's hometown. The church was celebrating its 150th anniversary. Now, this is way back in 1990 or 91, a full 10 years before my aunt was diagnosed. So my mom and my aunt, went to this celebration in Augusta. A week later, mom said, boy, we had such a great time in Augusta. My aunt said, oh, when was that? And my mom couldn't believe it. I mean, this was a huge deal.
It seems like it's in jest. It seems like it's a joke.
Yeah.
That you're just messing.
Yeah.
That was a full 10 years before my aunt showed any real signs of having dementia or Alzheimer's.
For my grandmother, the earliest signs were wandering. So literally appearing at some intersection. At the time, my grandparents lived in Los Angeles, but just at an intersection. Not sure why she was there or where she was trying to get. It manifests differently, but it's also critical. It's about getting the doctor as soon as you can, right? We haven't found a drug yet, but there are drugs that we're trying to figure out if they can slow down the pace.
Right. Can't cure it, but they can, they hope that some of these interventions and pharmaceutical interventions would be able to at least slow down.
Well, my dad's doctor explained that Aricept helps with Alzheimer's. He explained to my dad that without Aricept, your memory goes from here, plummets straight down. he said with Aricept, your memory still, fades, but it's more of at an angle, so to speak. It's more gradual.
Yeah. And the research is happening now. And so it's time to engage. It's time to learn. If you're young and you're worried a little bit about your parents, why not have the conversation now? Why be left with mystery? As a bioethicist, one of the things that I really have come to understand is that engaging in conversation about end of life, about what's coming, it doesn't create it. It leaves actually everyone much happier with knowing what folks wanted on the front end. And
another reason to talk about it.
It happened.
I'm gonna be real honest.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep this really real.
Yes.
Okay.
When a parent or loved one or whoever gets Alzheimer's and needs help, very often that can lead to a family breaking up, and that's because you might have 10 kids, and 9 of those kids are going to leave it to the one.
Yes.
To take care of the parent. And the other kids might have all kinds of advanced degrees and houses and resources, but somehow they're not going to find the time. I'm not talking about my family, by the way, but
so you're talking about mine. So I appreciate you telling the narrative so I don't have to tell it.
Okay. But I've seen it happen. It's important to have these conversations because I've seen families who were siblings who are upset because the parent wanted to give everything to the one kid who took care of them and leave the others out. Sometimes you have to let that happen because after all, they need the resources. And if you have your own house, don't try to pursue money that I don't want to start getting into this too deeply. But anyway, it's good to have these conversations because these battles are going to ensue. Who gets the money? Who gets the resources? Who's going to take care of mom or dad or whatever? Who is free? I was unmarried, childless, so I was able to come down here to North Carolina. My sister has a family. There was no problem for me to come down here. And there's only 2 of us. But where there's families of 5 and 6 kids and different stages of marriage and home ownership and whatnot, it's important to have these conversations.
No, because it happens so suddenly. So you were speaking, I was thinking about, I'd gone to see, so my grandparents had 6 children. There were 25 grandchildren. So we were not a small group of people. And when I began to notice changes, it was amazing to me. The first line of tension was, you're making something up because you just needed it to be something more than what it is. And then after several heated arguments and then medical verification, it's like, okay, now what? And then it was like, I looked to the left and I looked to the right, and just my grandmother and myself were in the room to fight the war. And it's like, okay, we gotta do this. And I, like yourself, didn't know anything about it. I just thought, she looks fine. So this is something that we can beat. And I promise you, on the day that she was trying to recover my name and she couldn't, and she broke down into tears, it's like, oh, this is not going to be something that's going to be easy. And that I can't fix this, but I can give her the quality of life.
Wow. My aunt called me kid. She never could quite figure out who I was. I blew up a gigantic picture of her family, immediate family. And I'd point at my mom and I'd say, you know who that is? And she'd say, Jean, my Jean. And I'd say, that's my mom. And all she could say was, oh, I declare. But she couldn't quite make the, but it was fine. She knew I belonged to her some kind of way. So I was fine. She called me kid. That was good enough.
Yeah. So.
And there's a lot of love that's left. And I think Shelytia and I were recently at a conference and heard a lot about music and using music that they're familiar with. That it can bring them back to life in a way that we may lose them, but for some reason music has a magical power or propensity or character that can bring people back. So
definitely
try to reconnect with the folks you love. And so don't just be out there grasping at straws. Like folks like Shelytia and I are here to steer you towards the resources that can help.
Right. And just be a listening ear if that's what you need. Because, none of us gets through this battle with the disease alone. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, we need, well, actually, we do have a couple of support groups.
Oh, okay.
Duke does have 3 meetings, I believe, for people with Alzheimer's. The problem is it's hard to get away.
Yes.
And I would think it might be a good idea for Duke to consider live stream. Well, there might be
confidentiality
privacy issues.
Yeah.
But it would be kind of nice if people could attend via live streaming in some kind of way. It's hard to get away when you're a caregiver. It's really hard.
Absolutely. That's one of the huge challenges. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for being on the show, Thomas Williams and Shelytia Cocroft. Now, what's the first step you want us to take, those of us who are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's?
Well, the first thing that I would suggest is we have to put you in touch with Henry Edmonds so that, he can explain to you the process for enrolling in the Bryant Alzheimer's Research Center registry. And then from there, he will assist you with understanding and learning more about the ongoing studies. And then if there are additional resources that you might be interested in, he's the person who can connect you to those resources. And if he can't if he can't get you the connection, he will find the connection for you so that, as Thomas is saying, we don't want people to feel like they're out alone in this struggle. And so it's important, again, to be able to identify persons who can put people in touch with resources.
Okay, and I will have Mr. Henry Edmonds' contact information in the discussion area of the description area of the show. So, okay.
And I would also just say, share this video. Go home and have a conversation with your family. If you're in your 30s and your parents are in your 50s, start to engage in the conversation. If you have a friend whose parents are older, ask if they've thought about how they're going to do caretaking. And I think that those are the kinds of small baseline conversations we can start to have, steering people towards the Bryant Alzheimer's Disease Research Center website and the resources that are there and the organizations that it is connected to. Those are the little first steps to, I think, engage people.
Right. And if there are organizations that view this and really want us to come out and engage in a community conversation, we are more than happy and ready to have those, conversations.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to attending something in the community.
Excellent.
Run by the two of you, because I would definitely show up. Even though my aunt's deceased, my dad's deceased, I'm still very, very interested in Alzheimer's. And again, I am working on this book because, again, it seems that when you look at all, except for the, what's it called, the 48-hour day, I believe it's called, that's the best book. That's definitely the best. But most of the other books are either memoirs or books for people with lots and lots of resources.
You also bring a very important cultural competency piece or cultural piece to this story, right? Because we know that our lives are a little bit different than others. And so just having somebody who can speak your language in your similar voice is comforting, So I'm looking forward to reading your book.
I am too.
And maybe we can help.
Yes.
Definitely. I really appreciate your being on the show. Thomas Williams and Shelytia Cocroft, thanks again. And folks, I will put contact information below. So when you watch this video and want to make a phone call or check a website, you can do so. And with that, thanks again for being on the show. And if you'd like to be a guest on TV Skywriter, be sure to contact me. The quickest way is via Twitter @Durham Skywriter. You don't have to be from Durham. Just a couple of weeks ago, my guests were in Kenya. So, and I'm talking with a hip hop group from Portugal. They're going to be on my show in a few weeks. So you don't have to be, from Durham to be on the show. And with that, I bid you adieu. You have a beautiful evening, and be sure to check out this information. It's really important. Alzheimer's is not a joke. And with that, have a beautiful evening. Ciao for now, and I will see you later.